Okay, everybody, it is 11:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our lunch and learn today. Do kind of want to let everyone know that we're having some technical difficulties statewide, so there may be some folks who were trying to join that haven't been able to get in, but this will be recorded and put on the community resource website as always, so they will be able to get to it later on. And just wanted to also let you know that if you need closed captioning, you can click the little CC bubble down in the bottom left corner, and that will get you your closed captioning. As I said, the recording will be on the community resource website, and I'll put that link in the chat in just a moment. Excuse me. And today we have Laura Casas Franco with us again from Heightened Potential to do her part 2 of co-regulation in early intervention. Excuse me, y'all. So we're going to use the chat for asking questions that we'll save till the end, and hopefully we'll have some time to go over those then. And so right now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Laura to let her get started.
Sounds great. I am so excited to continue talking about co-regulation with you all. We're going to start with just a little overview of things in case you weren't able to join part 1, but my goal is to delve into some of the topics that we had touched on briefly last time, and then maybe you all had some questions on, or just really expanding, how do we do this thing? How do we put co-regulation into practice? All right, so today I want to make sure that we review co-regulation so everyone understands what we're talking about. We'll focus on those strategies. I also want to spend some time talking about research on regulation, co-regulation, and then discipline. It's something that comes up a lot, I feel like, at least within my own sessions, because every time we deal with co-regulation, we're usually dealing with behavior, and where there's behavior, oftentimes we want discipline. So we're going to talk about what is the research saying right now about that. And then we'll talk about a couple case examples and some ways to apply the strategies today. So brief overview and review of co-regulation coming up. So it is a very dynamic process that does take a lot of years for us to develop. Typically, this is something that we hope starts to develop within that first year of life, that co-regulation between a caregiver and their infant to learn a nice foundation for what calm feels like and how we can help a child regulate that will over time turn into that self-regulation. So generally, it's going to be very caregiver initiated at the start. You know, if you think about an infant, you're doing a lot of the figuring out. You're figuring out what calms them down. You're figuring out how long and how much maybe to apply those strategies. And the child's borrowing that calm. So I think that's the big thing that really sets co-regulation apart, is the child is borrowing someone else's calm. And then as we learn what works for us, we start to do it a little bit more independently to the point where we eventually don't need to borrow someone else's calm at all, hopefully. Our behavior, both regulated and dysregulated, or when we're not calm, it's going to reflect our nervous system state more than our motivation. And I think this is the piece that a lot of caregivers get hung up on, is we try to put adult emotion and motivations to toddler behavior. They're manipulating me. They're trying to make me mad. You know, they might have figured out what pushes your buttons, but a lot of times the behaviors that we're seeing that feel like manipulation, or they feel like they're maybe trying to bother us, it's because their nervous system is in a state of upheaval and they're just not calm. It's more of communication versus like a deep desire to manipulate you as a 2-year-old. Our nervous system state is going to impact what we can access in our brain. So if we are feeling pretty upset, we're going to have a hard time accessing those higher level functions. So logic, impulse control, flexibility, communication, things that are already really hard for toddlers, it all goes out the window when they're upset. And so that nervous system state is directly tied to what we can access when we are upset. So that's where co-regulation needs to come in, help us to find calm, and then we can find our words, and then we can understand a little bit more logic. Our self-regulation is going to develop from so many attempts at successful co-regulation. So we really have to have many, many trials of this and experiences of what it feels like to be calm and to participate in that relationship with someone before we're able to successfully figure out how to do it ourselves. It's honestly, if you think about it, it's a lot like other motor skills that we learn or other skills that we acquired. We don't just pick it up the first time we try it, unfortunately. We have to try and fail and try and adjust, and then maybe one day we figure it out. There's some really great research on co-regulation. A lot of it ties into parent relationships and attachment theories, and I encourage you to go do some delving on your own because it's more than we have time for today. But research is really consistently showing that if a caregiver is responsive and they engage in those flexible interactions with their child, they're going to have a stronger emotional and behavioral regulation success over time. So we want to have that nice daily practice of caregiver and child having responsive interactions to build the ability to manage behavior and emotions over time. Co-regulation is not giving in, never saying no, preventing frustration, or eliminating all crying. Instead, our goal should be to stay connected. We're not leaving a child in the midst of being dysregulated to just figure it out on their own. They don't have those skills yet. It's going to be helping with big emotions, teaching skills during calm moments. So not when they are dysregulated, but when they're calm. And it's also going to be setting limits calmly. So a lot of caregivers, and we'll continue to touch on this during the presentation, but a lot of caregivers feel like if they are going to be co-regulating, it goes along with that like permissive style of parenting that sometimes gets confused with gentle parenting. There's a lot of labels, there's a lot of things on social media, and sometimes the misconception is if I am having this moment where I'm helping my child to calm down and I'm maybe not using discipline in the traditional way that families have been raised to use it when children misbehave, that it's more permissive and we're just letting them get away with it. And that is not the goal of co-regulation. The goal of co-regulation is to help build that really nice foundation and also to meet their child where they're at developmentally. There's 3 ingredients of co-regulation that have been defined by Duke. They did a really cool brief, and it builds on lots of literature that gives caregivers and program administrators and therapists some really beautiful guidelines for how do we do effective co-regulation. And it's kind of broken down by every stage of development. So Duke did this and they've updated it a little bit, and they've put everything together into one big mixing bowl in a brief that you can read yourself. You just look it up. And I really enjoyed the way that they broke down the 3 main pillars or ingredients of co-regulation. So warm, responsive relationships. If we have a responsive relationship where we are able to offer safety, predictability, and build trust with our child, they're going to feel so much more comfortable coming to us with big emotions. In order to have a relationship where we can co-regulate, we need to be responsive. So we need to respond when a child is upset. We need to respond when a child is happy. We need to show them that the tiny emotion that they're feeling matters, and just as much as the big emotion that they might feel too. So we'll build a relationship during moments of frustration, happiness, just generally a nice, responsive relationship. We also want to have a supportive environment. And so supportive environments are predictable. They're going to be nurturing. They're going to be safe. It's going to be a space where a child feels comfortable letting their emotions show. And then it's also going to be a place where there are the things that the child needs to be successful put in place, whether that's sensory supports or visual supports or reducing unnecessary stressors, just things where the child's environment is supporting them as a tiny human. The other pillar is that intentional skill building, which is where therapists can oftentimes come in and provide some strategies and opportunities to work on how do we move from co-regulation to self-regulation when it's time. So we want to use calm moments to proactively teach. What do we do when we're upset? How do we manage frustration? What are emotions? All of those things, so that when the moment happens, when the emotions come in and the garage door closes and we can't access our higher cognitive functions, we've laid some of the groundwork. And so some of those skills are more easily accessible because we've practiced them. This is going to involve teaching things like waiting, labeling emotions, some of our different coping tools, if appropriate. It also might mean working on flexibility or problem solving, which again, those are things that are emerging. Kind of by the time we're around 3, we're starting to see those skills emerge in a typically developing child. So they're hard skills for these kiddos. So you want to use play and things that the child is successful and interested in first before we're moving and applying these to things that are hard, like transitioning away from the park. One of the most important things we need to do when we are working with families on regulation is supporting the caregiver. Because without adult regulation, we really can't have co-regulation successful. There's a bit of a long quote here. I'm going to read it for you just so that everyone is able to experience it. Caregivers' modeling of emotion regulation strategies may communicate to their child, for better or for worse, what is normative and expected in their family with respect to how emotions are expressed and managed. In addition, when caregivers are highly dysregulated, whether in response to their child's distress or some other stressor, they may have more difficulty accessing the parenting practices they would typically use to help their child navigate negative emotions. And that's Nivison et al. 2026. So if we are experiencing some sort of upset ourselves, whether it's the child's meltdown that caused it or something else that's going on in life that's just a stressor for us, we may end up modeling some ways to show our emotions or manage our emotions that we don't want our little ones to be copying. So it's really important that caregivers work on their own regulation as well. Children are very perceptive. They pick up on the stressors of life, even if they don't understand them. And oftentimes they don't understand them, and that makes them more upset because they don't quite know why mom's so upset. But they detect our facial expressions, our tone, our posture, the speed of our movement, our breathing. All of these things can lead to some emotional contagion. I had a family this week that I was working with where the mom was reflecting on how much of a difference she's noticed it has made with her toddler when she lowers her tone when she's trying to calm him down. And instead of having this big, kind of like exuberant response where she's using loud words and kind of, I think she described it as a choppy tone. She tried to use calm words and slow it down a little bit. And she's like, wow, that alone made a really big difference. We want to make sure that we're not escalating a child by our own frustrations, which is so hard when we are trying to also manage the stressors of whatever caused the child to get upset too. Because generally there's a situation that we have to deal with as well. Some strategies that you could use: you could pause. Just pause for a moment before you say anything. You can lower your voice, slow your movements, breathe first. Caregiver sensitivity and our emotional availability, it really strongly predicts our child's socio-emotional outcomes. So it has to start with a caregiver. There's a few different ways that we can support caregiver regulation. So they may not have ever learned when they were younger how to label emotions. They may not have understood what's happening when they do get upset. Something that I have seen a lot, especially with caregivers who maybe also are neurodivergent, or they have multiple children, or life is just stressful, they get more dysregulated when the meltdown happens, because there's something about that meltdown that is then causing them to feel a little bit dysregulated. Is it a sensory based part of it? Is it that it got really loud and that is really dysregulating to the caregiver because child is screaming on the floor or throwing things and there's loud crashes? For some other folks, it may not quite be the sensory aspects of the meltdown that are triggering to them, but it could be that the child is saying no. It could be something that the child is doing is triggering some past trauma for that caregiver. And it's really important for us to help them identify, what is it about that meltdown that is dysregulating to you? I don't know if y'all have worked with any families or experienced this yourself, but there's some people who can just stay calm through anything. And it's amazing. It's really impressive. Those caregivers are able to tap into their regulation because they've either done the work or they maybe don't have a history of things that are going to be triggering them within that meltdown. So it really helps to understand what about it is causing that dysregulation in the caregiver. Once we know why the caregiver is dysregulated, and this may involve them doing work with their own therapists or their own family, to be able to identify those things, we want to help the family identify tools that are going to calm them down. So how can they self-regulate so that they're able to then co-regulate? And then we want them to build in those activities into their lifestyle so that they're not always having to reset after the meltdown has happened, but maybe they're prepared for it. So they're doing things throughout the day to help themselves feel calm. That one is one of the hardest ones, I think, for caregivers, because so much of the day they're just giving and giving and giving. And it's really hard for them to take the time to then feel like they deserve or they should be spending the time on a regulating activity for themselves. It doesn't have to be a big, long thing. Sometimes just 5 or 10 minutes is enough. All right, so our caregiver is regulated. They're now able to access co-regulation. What do we do when the meltdown happens? To be honest, we're not going to do a whole lot, generally. I think you all probably have experienced this yourselves, and I see it so often in practice that less is more. Because remember, that thinking brain, it's not there with us when we're upset. It's gone. It checked out. We cannot access logic. So we're not going to be doing a lot of teaching, right? We're not going to be doing a lot of trying to get them to do specific things because they just can't process it. We're going to connect before we correct. So some examples of that would be, instead of telling the child to stop crying, you might just state, "You're having a hard time," or, "Oh, that felt tricky." Or, instead of use your words, "I'll help you." You could maybe, for some children, ask them to show me, especially if it's something that you think is communication based, where they can't use their words, but they might be able to still access that show me if you think there is an object that or a situation that they're able to point and show you. But a lot of times just being there, "Oh, when you need help, mama's here." And then you just wait. A sequence that you could use is to make sure everyone's safe, first off. If you need to move baby brother or the dog into a different space so that it's not in the firing zone for those little fists or legs or pinches or bites, you want to make sure that everyone's safe. You're going to make sure you're regulated. If you need to, take that breath, count to 10, do a strategy for yourself. The meltdown will still be there. Don't you worry, it's not going anywhere quickly. And then you're going to validate. So those are some of those connection statements that we just went over. Could also just be something like, "Oh, you are mad that tower fell over." Or, "You wanted to go outside. I hear you." You could offer support. "I'm here if you want a hug." You can hold the hands out. Oftentimes, if we just try to swoop in, our little friends will let us know quickly, "No, no, I'm not ready for this." It could be just being next to them. "Oh, mama's here." Waiting. We're going to teach later. So this is where we're not using a lot of words to explain. We're not using questions. The thinking brain will come back later. And depending on the child's developmental age, they might be able to remember what happened and you might be able to teach a little bit about it. It could be the situation's gone from their brain and you're not going to be able to reference it. And so that's where we're relying a little bit more on teaching when they're calm. So they're learning flexibility. So they're learning how to manage change, but it's not like specific to a situation because they can't always make that connection between, "Well, you remember earlier today when you kicked your brother because you were mad that he took your blocks?" That's a lot of logic and being able to apply things that a 2-year-old just doesn't have yet. And that brings us to discipline because that's oftentimes what discipline does require. It requires the ability for us to think back on things that we've done. What does research say? So we know that punishment is probably only going to stop behavior temporarily. It definitely does not build regulation, and it can model undesired behaviors. So one of the things that I think I hear the most from families is that when their child is upset, they use their hands to hit. Something that is very common in the South is corporal punishment. And if we are modeling to a child who does not really have a lot of logic yet, that when mom or dad is upset about something that you did, we'll use our hands to show you. But then we're upset when our child uses their hands to express that they didn't like something, right? There's a disconnect. And so we have to make sure that we're not modeling the very behaviors that we're struggling with in our child if we are trying to use that as a way to discipline. Because then we're just kind of reinforcing that, yeah, this is how we do it. Because little ones, they trust their caregivers, hopefully. And so if mom and dad use this tool to help show that they're upset, well, maybe I should do that. That's how we do it in the family. So we have to help caregivers kind of reflect on, is it working? Is there a connection between the things that we're modeling? And does your child have the logic to understand why you can do it and they cannot? And they probably do not yet. So we know that children learn regulation through modeling, consistent boundaries, predictable consequences, emotional coaching, and then repair, because sometimes we will do things that are not perfect and we have to repair that relationship. I think one of the best things we can do for kiddos is those consistent boundaries and the predictable consequences. If you've been working with a family or if you yourself have been trying to make progress with something and you feel like you started adding in boundaries to things and then the behaviors got bigger, or maybe your boundary is different than grandma's boundary and the behavior got bigger, it's because that child is trying to find the consistency. So when we change our response to a behavior, the child is looking for what used to happen instead of that new boundary until it's predictable and they know to expect it. And Same with if there's differences between caregivers. So if one caregiver is really strict and then the other caregiver is not, that child's behaviors are going to be so all over the place because they're just trying to find the consistency. Because I know with grandma, if I just cry long enough, she's going to give me the thing that I wanted. And so having consistent boundaries across caregivers is helpful. Consequences do not have to be timeout. Consequences can be something that is developmentally appropriate for the child to understand. And it could be things to keep people safe potentially. So, if you have a child that is throwing things, maybe give them one choice of, or one opportunity to do something different. Toys are for stacking, like our rings are for stacking. You state what you want them to do with it. Rings are for stacking. If the child throws the rings, they're not able to have that impulse control to be safe with them. Oh, rings are not for throwing. We're going to say bye-bye rings so that we're having that predictable consequence. But we also let them know what we expected of them first. There's, again, lots of research out there, but that sensitive, responsive caregiving is being linked through research to better long-term outcomes when it comes to socio-emotional skills. So it's going to be co-regulation, and it's going to be supporting the development of self-regulation instead of just that externally motivated behavioral compliance, which is what a lot of discipline is focused on. And that's okay for some families, but there's always a point that you get to where it's just not enough. That external motivation is not enough. And then we'll see the behaviors come back or the behaviors change. We really want it to be internally motivated. We want to make sure that we are matching our discipline to development. This is oftentimes hard for caregivers to think about because we don't really remember what it was like to be so little and to have so little impulse control and so little ability to control the things we say, the things we do, and how we regulate. So a lot of the skills that we're still developing, impulse control, emotional regulation, flexible thinking, attention, working memory, and then our language for telling people how we're feeling. These are all things that we're still emerging with in the age of early intervention. And developmentally, a child who is experiencing delays may still be working on developing these skills well into school-aged years. So we need to make sure our discipline is matching the development. This is so tricky for caregivers, and it will take a lot of reflection and a lot of gentle, guided conversation to make sure that we're not shutting down what has been culturally or in a family the norm for a while, because as soon as we shut down, those caregivers are going to stop listening. Effective discipline is only effective when it matches what a child's brain is developmentally capable of doing. Much like anything that we work on in therapy, right? We want to make sure that our outcome or our goal is matched. It's an appropriate match to what that child is developmentally capable of doing. If you ask a 2-year-old to stop, think, calm down, remember a rule that we talked about this morning, and make a better choice in the middle of a tantrum, wow, that's a lot. That's something we struggle with as adults to remember when we're stressed sometimes. So that little 2-year-old is not getting set up for success if we are expecting them to stop, think, calm down, remember that we don't grab toys from other people and that they should have made a better choice and maybe use their words, right? That child's just going to get more upset because the expectation did not match what the child was developmentally capable of doing. So, what does all of this mean for discipline? I'm not going to tell you today how you or your families should discipline children, because that is a deeply personal and familial experience and decision. It's influenced by so many factors. There's just not one appropriate broad statement. I would encourage you to think about the developmentally appropriate goals and providing education that really thinks about the co-regulation, building towards self-regulation aspects of things, versus that like behavior management does take more buy-in over the long run. So instead of asking with children, why won't they listen? Why aren't they listening when I tell them to stop and to think about it and to tell me why they did that thing that they did? Maybe consider, oh, does the developmental level or skill of this child line up with what I'm asking? Can they explain why they went over and kicked down Bobby's tower? Or did they just want to kick it down because it was fun and they didn't have impulse control? They didn't understand that societal expectation yet if we don't kick down other people's things. It's all just emerging. Effective discipline should focus on teaching new skills, potentially adjusting our expectations, and then providing support before expecting independence. We're going to need to practice our desired behaviors repeatedly. One of the biggest mindset shifts that we can offer caregivers is helping them to understand behavior and see behaviors through a developmental lens. If we think about a 2-year-old, they're not grabbing a toy to be manipulative. They're still learning how to wait and how to take the perspective of someone else. Ooh, grandma doesn't like when I grab that from her. And impulse control is still coming on board. So they're still working on things, right? Just like if a preschooler had a big meltdown and we're expecting them to just calm themselves down, oftentimes we say it and then we expect it to happen with like 10 seconds delay, right? Like it's like, calm down. And then they're shocked that the child's not calm. That little nervous system is so overwhelmed and they need someone else to help them feel calm, build the building blocks, and then they'll be ready down the road to self-regulate. A lot of caregivers do struggle with buy-in for co-regulation initially. A lot of that has to do with where we grow up, the people that we spend time with and model behaviors for us. We hear things like children need consequences, don't reward bad behavior, they're testing you. If you give in once, they'll expect it every time. And it's going to take some time and conversation to help them understand that we are just offering solutions. We're offering some ideas that are developmentally driven. We're not there to convince them. We are there as their partner to make sure that they feel supported and ready for change themselves. So when caregivers are able to understand that skills are still developing, our goal is really to move from that perspective of discipline is less about controlling behavior and more about teaching skills. Through those repeated experiences, we generally get a little bit more buy-in. And it may help to talk about the fact that we're not lowering expectations forever. We're just going to provide the right amount of support until the child is capable of doing it independently or with different supports. Again, just to reiterate, a lot of caregivers hear co-regulation or regulation, calm, emotions, some of the words that we use when we're describing co-regulation. And they're worried that we want them to be permissive and that they're going to lose authority within their family. We're not expecting them to stop setting limits and to allow bad behavior. Our goal is to provide education in the way that makes sense to that family so that they can see why behaviors happen. And then also, how do we move towards their goal behaviors? And sometimes we can do this in a week or two. Sometimes it takes several months. It really depends on the family. We want to make sure that we're leading with curiosity. So if they share a concern like, I don't want to reward their bad behavior, or if I give in, they're going to expect it every time. Lead with curiosity. That makes a lot of sense. Based on what a lot of us learned growing up, that is how we are taught to manage behaviors. Would it be okay if I shared some newer research and what it's telling you about how young children learn? We want to make sure that they feel respected and that they have valid opinions, and that their whole history that led to where they are now is not just being poo-pooed upon by the therapist. We want to make sure that we're not judging, we're just connecting and maybe sharing some things that will help them move towards their goals. The American Association of Pediatrics does emphasize that effective discipline does involve teaching children appropriate behavior. But we also support their health of social, emotional, and cognitive development. So we want to make sure that we're not simply stopping that unwanted behavior, but we're also teaching skills. Sometimes it helps to talk to caregivers about what kind of adult do you hope your child becomes? And they're probably going to list a lot of skills, not behaviors. Sharing is a behavior, but generally caregivers are going to list something like kind. So helpful, things that are skills that we can work on with them. And in order to do that, we really do need to start working on co-regulation. We can't just have discipline because we want to address all of the things that the child needs to be able to learn and develop and have change within those moments of frustration. If we want a child to learn to manage frustration independently someday, they do need to have hundreds of experiences of an adult helping them during frustration. So our shift is we want to be less about stopping today's behavior and more about building tomorrow's skills. We are co-regulating with caregivers just as much as the caregivers are co-regulating with children. So sometimes we have to use very intentional phrasing to do this. And like always within early interventions, we really want to focus on coaching. So it's not direct teaching, it's not expectations, it's just that coaching, the encouragement, modeling, supporting them in trying things. If we shut a caregiver down, their own nervous system might become defensive. And just like the child that we're trying to help learn to co-regulate, they're going to have a harder time absorbing new information. We really need to model the same principles that we're trying to teach. So some examples of things that you could say if you were thinking in your mind, don't punish, you could maybe say, let's teach the skill we want to see. Instead of saying, ignore the behavior, let's figure out what the behavior is communicating. Just stay calm. Oh, we don't want to say that. But we could say is what helps you stay calm when your child is upset. So we're opening up that conversation for reflection and the caregiver to come to their own conclusions with support as needed about what helps them feel calm to then apply to the situation so that they can stay calm when their child is upset. We really want to focus on collaboration instead of correction. It's very similar to what we're doing with our little ones. Parent coaching research, it consistently shows that if we are using a collaborative and a strength-based approach, we're really going to get a lot greater caregiver engagement. And that's going to sustain the use of new strategies over time versus if we're using something that's very directive and the caregiver doesn't feel like they're getting a lot of say in the process or if it's judgmental. Some coaching strategies to use with caregivers. Validate. Validate, validate, validate. Nobody wants to be told that they're doing everything wrong. We just want to make sure that we are supporting the caregivers in the successes they're having. You might have to look very hard to find them in certain situations, but helping validate why they're having the reactions, why this meltdown feels so hard, all of those things will help to get caregiver buy-in. We want to ask before telling, lead with curiosity, really, in situations. So find out why that's the way they've been handling things. Maybe someone told them that was the way to do it. Maybe grandma tells them every Sunday at dinner that that's the only way to handle this. And so they don't feel like they can try anything else because grandma raised them and they trust grandma. You don't want to overwhelm, so focus on one strategy at a time. We're really going to celebrate those small successes too. Oh my goodness, did you see how quickly he calmed down today? What felt different about that? Or I noticed that you were able to use such a calm and steady voice even when he was yelling in your face. Wow, that is really impressive. I don't know if I could have done that myself. We're really celebrating the success so that they feel like, yeah, I can do that again. Even though it's hard, I can do it again. You could think about asking more reflective questions instead of, have you tried? So, what do you notice happens before Bobby gets upset? Or what helps them recover? What helps you stay calm? Really get them involved and kind of leading the reflection. We want to help coach their observation skills because when you leave and you go home and you're not there to coach them through the situation about why that child got upset, it really helps if they have built some of their own skills to understand how to figure out what's going on in the situation so that they feel ready to handle it themselves. Okay, we're going to jump into some case studies. All right, number 1. Every transition ends in a tantrum. Poor Liam. He's 28 months. So right in the middle of that age that a lot of kiddos in early intervention are. Liam's mother reports that leaving the playground is one of the most challenging parts of her day. When it's time to leave, Liam cries, screams, throws himself to the ground, and often attempts to run back towards the playground. If his mother picks him up, he kicks, arches his back, and sometimes he hits her. His mom shares, I think he's just trying to get his way. I usually tell him we're leaving, then carry him to the car while he screams. Liam's mother is starting to avoid the playground because transitions have become so stressful. What might be happening? So, his behavior is consistent with a child whose nervous system is overwhelmed, right? So transitions are a very common trigger for a lot of big emotions in our little ones because they're still developing impulse control. So the ability to not act on the things they want to do in the moment, that emotional regulation. I like to think about emotional regulation as knowing when, where, and how much emotion is appropriate to show. As adults, we typically know that it's not appropriate to just burst into tears in the middle of a meeting at work. But we do know that when we're at home with a loved one, or maybe with our puppy dog snuggled on the couch, that's an appropriate time to let out those tears. Another skill that 28-month-year-olds are still developing is flexibility, or the ability to have a situation change and it be okay. They don't understand time. They don't understand 5 minutes. And then our communication skills. So all of those things, right? Those are all the things we need to successfully transition. No wonder he's having a hard time. So instead of him being intentionally defiant, which is that perspective mom was thinking, he's probably struggling with a transition that just is exceeding his current developmental abilities. What can we do? Before the transition, we can give some warnings using simple language. 5 more minutes if he does understand some time, or if you've introduced visual timers or a countdown, or something much more concrete. 1 more time down the slide, or 2 more times down the slide, 1 more time down the slide, bye-bye slide. Use the things that are developmentally appropriate for them. And we can also make a consistent routine for when he leaves the park so that he knows what to expect. A lot of kids understand bye-bye. So we can start to say bye-bye swing, bye-bye slide, bye-bye climbing tower, say goodbye to multiple things. And then that could also involve that next part, that transition into the literal transition, where we're maybe saying, where's the car? Car, where are you? Is it under the slide? No. Is it on the castle? No. Where's the car? Kind of initiating that transition's happening with a playful interaction that makes sense to their brain. That could be part of your departure routine. During that actual transition, You're going to use your calm voice and speak slowly. You want to maintain the limit, but also validate that it's hard. An example is, oh, you're having so much fun. It's hard to leave. It's time to go. If he accepts it, you could offer some physical co-regulation, a hug, being next to him, holding his hand. But we really want to make sure that we're not using like a really long explanation or a negotiation when he's upset, right? Because that brain, whatever logic it had access to, is gone. Door closed. Is just emotions. So we have to calm the nervous system before we can access any sort of logic. After you transition, or if you were practicing for next time, if the child understands this, you could talk about what happened using some simple language. Oh, it was so hard to leave the park today. Your body felt really upset. That's it, right? They're not going to understand more than that. We can practice our transition skills. I really, really encourage laying those foundational skills during low stress activities. Practice using a timer to go into an activity they love. Practice first, then language with things that they love so that you're building the foundation, and then you can kind of adjust as you need the skills that they are needing to apply that to. And then really celebrate those successful departures, even if they were just tiny improvements. We want to make sure that we're not ignoring the tantrum, right? Because then we're not really offering co-regulation. We're going to be co-regulating in the moment, building transition skills over time outside of the big emotions. I really like thinking about things as he's having a hard time, not he's giving you a hard time. Oh, this is really hard for him. It's a really hard time for him. Let's try to make this transition more predictable so his brain and body can learn what to expect. It's a little bit more regulation based, but we're also acknowledging that, this is something that you need to do. You need to set a boundary about this. So let's build some of those skills. Okay, case study 2. Our other little friend, Mason, 30 months, a little bit older. He's always on the go. Mason's parents describe him as constantly moving. Throughout the day, he climbs onto furniture, he climbs onto countertops, he jumps from the couch, even though they've told him so many times, don't jump off the couch. He might run away from caregivers in public places. He crashes into people and furniture during play. He thinks it's great. His sister does not. He really looks for that rough and tumble play, and he wants to be swung and spun all the time. If it's a structured activity, like a meal, or if they're trying to do books, or when he's at school doing circle time, he really has a hard time staying seated for more than a minute or two. When his parents try to stop his unsafe behaviors, he usually laughs, runs away, or goes right back to it. His parents, they report feeling exhausted and often respond by repeatedly saying, "No climbing," or placing him in a timeout, but they just see these behaviors come back. What might be happening? He appears to be a child with a high need for movement and proprioceptive input, who's still, because we know where he is age-wise, he's still developing a lot of the skills that are going to keep him safe while he's experiencing this movement. So impulse control, safety awareness, motor planning, emotional regulation, his attention and sustained engagement. Those are all those emerging skills at this age. So we need to ask the question, instead of how do we stop the movement, it could be how do we provide safe movement while we teach body control and safety. So our research supports that sensory-seeking behaviors are often kind of an adaptive way that a child is going to be obtaining the sensory information that their nervous system needs to be organized. So if we simply try to stop the behavior, for a child who does not have good impulse control, well, they're going to go right back to something that is helping their body feel organized, because I really don't understand where I am in space unless I'm bumping into things. I need that feedback. So simply stopping the behavior, if we don't provide an alternative, it's not really going to address the sensory or developmental need. And so that's where we keep seeing the behaviors come up over and over again, right? Because the child can't stop. Because without that impulse control, their little brain is just saying, oh, please run around, please. I don't understand where we are. I need that feedback. We need to be proactive. So we need to meet the sensory need before it leads to unsafe behavior. So an OT on the team can help with the dosage and finding the correct activities for that specific child. Oftentimes, there are many ways that you can get sensory needs met that are safe. We're going to use frequent movement opportunities throughout the day, oftentimes. Common things at this age, obstacle courses, heavy work. So things that activate the receptors in our joints and our skin. Could be carrying groceries, carrying a heavy laundry basket, maybe a weighted stuffed animal, pushing or pulling weighted objects that are appropriate to the kiddo's size and strength. You could do animal walks. Sometimes jumping on a trampoline with supervision is helpful, climbing when it's appropriate, and then rolling, crawling through tunnels, or crashing safely into cushions. We really want to embed these into the day. Because we know that that's going to reduce the disruptive behaviors, because the child's going to already have those needs met. Because usually they're disruptive because the child's just trying to meet that sensory need. How do we co-regulate during high energy moments? Because it's not necessarily a meltdown, right? So the child might not be upset, but they also might still need some co-regulation. So if you have a child that's getting wound up, which sometimes they do as they're on their journey, they will sometimes need that co-regulation. So you're going to stay close, use a calm voice and simple language, match his energy to gain that joint attention, and then slow it down. And then turn regulation into play. Let's stomp like dinosaurs. Can you push against my hands? One I really like is, let's try to move the wall. And you just push into the wall with those hands. We want to make sure that we're using play-based co-regulation because it's going to support the engagement, while we also reduce demands. Because we're not just telling them to do something, we're going to be doing it with them. So we're modeling. Okay, I'm looking at our time and we don't have a ton of time left. So I want to make sure we leave time for questions if we have them. Let me pop back over to the main screen. Do we have questions?
There are not any questions currently, but
Okay.
so if you want to keep going, and then I can kind of stop and let you know if a question pops in.
That's perfect. Okay, still on Mason. Some additional things to consider. So with our friends who are sensory seeking, movement is not necessarily the problem. It's more going to be unsafe movement or movement that interrupts activities. So there's lots of ways that we can help the child get that safely. We might need to coach the caregiver on why this is happening. So education on the sensory systems, if that's within your scope. And then coaching on how do we problem solve this. So Mason's body, it's telling us it needs a lot of movement, isn't it? So we're probably not going to be trying to get him to stop moving, right? We just want him to learn over time where, when, and how to get that movement safely. So the more opportunities we give him to meet that need in appropriate ways, the easier it's going to become for him to sit down and eat a meal or participate in circle time. It helps if you're asking those questions that get the caregivers really thinking about patterns. When does he seek movement the most? What types of movement help him get organized or to calm down a little bit to be able to sit and be ready to learn? How long does that calming effect last? And then what routines usually lead to unsafe behaviors? So every time you do bath time, does he immediately get out of the tub and then go start climbing on the kitchen counter or hanging upside down over the back of the couch? Things like this are helpful to start understanding how do we offer alternatives that are going to meet the need, but also be safer? And what do we need to structure in our routines potentially to help set them up for success? Sensory seeking is not misbehavior. It is a child struggling to organize their body, and they are going to need co regulation to be able to join with you, to feel ready to transition to something else, and also to learn which ways are safe for them to meet those needs for their body. We want to make sure that we're providing co regulation, but we're also changing the environment a little bit to make sure that they're safe. Because remember, they don't have impulse control yet, oftentimes. That's why we're seeing unsafe behaviors. And we want to also add in those sensory rich play experiences with boundaries as appropriate. Our key takeaways from today: children don't learn how to regulate because adults tell them to calm down. They learn because adults repeatedly are going to be connected with them. They're predictable, both in their responses and their boundaries. They provide safety. They're going to model regulation, and they're going to teach skills after the emotions settle. All right. We'll open it back up for questions at this point, but none.
Okay. Yes, Laura, we do have one question. How would you handle a situation where the family does not think that the behavior can be corrected? Say mom shares that's just how he or she is and is not open to accepting that with a little work, the child can learn more appropriate behavior.
Oh, oh man, that is a tough one because we cannot force anyone to make change within their family, right? I think oftentimes reflecting on, is this working for you? Is this how you all want this situation to go? And that's really all you can do. If the caregivers are not ready for that conversation, they're not. If it's a situation where something's unsafe, I would maybe recommend taking a slightly more intensive approach with education and trying to help them understand why that behavior maybe isn't a safe long-term thing. Sometimes getting them thinking about the future helps. So yeah, it's fine when your 2-year-old is kicking you during diaper changes. Do we also want them to be kicking when they are 5 and they're upset, or when they're 10 and they're upset? So helping them kind of shift to the future may help that perspective a little bit. But that's a tough one because you really cannot force people to make change. If only we had magic wands.
Ashley asked or said, this was great. Do you ever present for parents?
I have presented to some family groups in the past in Knox County and through the Emory Valley Center. I've presented before. I will give you fair warning, I'm going on maternity leave in a couple of months, so I will only be presenting for a short amount of time before I will be taking a break, but I'm happy if you want to talk about opportunities more than
Yes, and we put your email also in the chat. So anyone can reach out to Laura with more questions after our time is up today. Or if you have any questions about the slides, those are Laura's slides. So you would need to reach out to her directly about the slides. And there was a question about the FormStack link. I did put the FormStack link in the chat up near the top. If you hover over the link, it will pop up, it will show the link and you can click on it and it should take you directly to the FormStack. We have checked it and it is working. So if you're having difficulty with it, just email Emily. Her email is in that chat entry as well. And think, so we've talked about all of that. And do make sure that you do that FormStack link. Emily put it back in the chat again to get your credit for today. And then we want you to join us all on August the 26th from 11:30 to 12:30 Central for our quarterly Lunch and Learn. This is not part of their summer series. Supports and Services 101 from early intervention to the classroom. that will be presented by Catherine Williams from TN Step. We've had Catherine with us before, and we're looking forward to having her again. And we do really want to thank you, Laura, so much for your two-part series. I think this was all really great information, and everyone got a lot out of it, hopefully. And as I said before, if you have any more questions for Laura, because our time is up today, please feel free to email her, and we put that in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll hang out for a few more minutes if anyone needs anything. We've just got some people saying thank you in the chat as well.
Thank y'all for having me. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to sign off for today. Bye.
Bye, guys.